Okay, welcome everyone to the session this afternoon with Elena. I just want to mention that this week it is Global Entrepreneurship Week, which I'm sure most of you here now have heard this spiel before, but I do want to take a moment to welcome and introduce this week as Do It in Durham Week. So this is Durham Region's celebration of entrepreneurship, and it's held each November during Global Entrepreneurship Week. And it's really about a collaboration of Durham businesses, support, educational and networking organizations who have come together to encourage and support entrepreneurs, job creators, and innovators who create economic growth in Durham Region. So if you're looking to start a business, invest in a business, grow a business, we encourage you to do it in Durham. Also, if you are posting about the week, any of the events you're attending, please use the hashtag Do It In Durham 2023, hashtag GEW Canada, which stands for Global Entrepreneurship Week, and of course, tag the presenters and BACD as well. And I won't take up too much more time. I just want to say welcome, Elena, and thank you for taking the time to deliver this presentation today.
I am so excited. So thank you so much. So we're going to get into it. So while I start kind of introducing myself, I'd love for all of you guys to even start telling me where you're even zooming in from. So feel free to tell me where you're zooming in from in the chat. I know that this is located in Durham, but I don't know if anyone is straggler like myself that maybe isn't exactly in Durham, but operating online in some capacity. So we're going to be talking about the top contracts your service-based business needs. Okay, so we're going to go over a lot of the basics, what they are, you should be aware of them, how they can work in your business, what they're good for. So if you're new to business or a new entrepreneur, or you're doing anything kind of service-based or e-commerce or anything like this is going to be really interesting for you. So Pickering, Ajax, love it. So my name is Elena. So thank you so much, Ashley, for introducing me. So I'm going to ask that we utilize the chat and just make sure you guys are muted and don't interrupt. Otherwise, in my experience, these things can get really sidetracked. So if you have any questions as we go through, just drop them in the chat and then we'll circle back to them at the end. But I'm a lawyer. So I also call myself an entrepreneur. I started my own law firm about 4 years ago. And I service online business owners, small businesses, and teams that have under 5 employees. So anybody that's small is really what we thrive on. So we work on growing your company, we work on structuring your company, we work on creating contracts for your company, we help you get your first few hires. So these are some of the things we're going to talk about. Before that, I was a former international lawyer, so if you're curious, there's a bit of my background there. And now currently I run EFV Legal, which is the virtual boutique law firm that I founded. And I'm also the founder of Contracts for Entrepreneurs, which is a website that sells legal contract templates. So everything we're talking about today, you can either, and I just want to say one of the big questions that comes out is, lawyers are so expensive. Well, there's 2 routes, right? You can go the lawyer route, which would be kind of EFV Legal, if you will. This isn't a pitch, but just to kind of give you an idea. Or you can get a really solid contract online that's maybe for beginner businesses that kind of help you get started so that you're legally protected from day one. And I'm going to tell you why you want to be legally protected from day one and why this matters. Okay. So I love it. Okay, perfect. So this would not be a legal presentation without a legal disclaimer, all right? So by accessing or participating in this presentation, either now or later in the recording, you understand that this is not legal advice, okay? It's really meant to be educational, informational only. You've really not retained me, Elena Favaro Viana, as your lawyer, so there's no attorney-client, lawyer-client privilege offered without a retainer agreement. So if at any point you guys say, oh, a lawyer advised me, no, I did not. Okay, this is just education. It's really serious in the legal profession to make sure we have these distinctions. And a lot of your businesses will also teeter on regulatory bodies that have rules. And there's a lot of legislation, even if maybe you're a branding agency, competition laws, certain things that will basically say when you're giving advice and when you're not. Okay. So I know you guys are telling me where you're calling in from, and some of you already got ahead of me, but I'd love to know what entrepreneurial journey you're in. So tell me kind of in the chat quickly what you guys are doing. And this is going to help me and you. So it's going to help you because, of course, this is Entrepreneurship Week. So if you can get a referral or business out of this, the more the merrier. But it's also going to help me try to tailor some of this specifically to kind of who we have in the audience. So feel free to just drop off a couple of things for me so I can pick up on it. Okay. I love it. Business support services, excellent business solutions. I love it. We have a dance studio, accounting. Oh, I love my accountants. Fantastic. Crafted cosmetics, body butters. Ooh, tour operator. Tico. Thank you. Good, good, good. Okay, perfect. I'm going to pick on you a little bit. Student. Yes, perfect. Idea stage, e-commerce. I love it. Okay, keep letting me know. So we're going to talk about two things quickly. We're going to drop into building your advisory team, and then we're going to get into the real meat of today's topic, which is all about contracts. Marketing, I love it. So first things first, when you're starting a business, no matter what stage of business you're in, you really need to be having an advisory team, okay? I'm going to talk as if we're all at the beginning stages of business, so under 3 years, start up to 3 years. This is going to be one of the core pieces of any successful business. And in fact, if we fast forward to very successful entrepreneurs that are making multi-millions of revenue, you'll notice that they're constantly having lunch with these people. So your advisory team is going to be your lawyer, your accountant, and your bookkeeper, okay? So when I talk about these things, and I said before, I don't want to ever be pitchy. That's not my goal. That's why I bring in the accountant and the bookkeeper as well, because your business success will rely on these, okay? I know that when we start business, we're always so excited to bring in help and get branding and maybe get a virtual assistant and maybe get all these other people to help us grow the business, but really your core focus should be on the basics and your foundation, all right? Having a business in Canada is actually a legal privilege. So if you're operating a business, you're already in bed with the law, okay? And so I know that having a lawyer and talking about the law is not always so sexy, but it really is what you're doing. And so making sure that your business is set up for success from the beginning with a lawyer is perfect. Understanding what your tax consequences and implications are going to be with an accountant, even better. Having a bookkeeper that's going to make sure that you save every dollar on the table and help you make some of these strategic moves as you grow and scale is going to be critical. What the best team would be is if all of these 3 people know each other and are talking to each other. Okay. So when you go on this journey and you're like, oh, I don't even know where to find a lawyer, or I don't know where to find an accountant, find somebody that maybe has experience in your business. Okay. Because not every lawyer is designed the same. They're all going to have certain niches and specializations. So if you're going to go with someone general, steer sort of clear because they're going to know certain businesses better than others. If you find yourself with someone general, how curious are they? Are they curious to sit down with you? Okay. So I will say as a corporate lawyer, one of my biggest things when clients come to me is I say, I can't actually legally advise you unless I know your entire business. So I want to get to the point, maybe spend an afternoon with you so that tomorrow, if I had to, in theory, I could open up a similar business like yours because I've learned everything about yours. And that way I can give you the best advice possible. And I would say that's the attitude you're going to want to find from each person on your advisory team. Okay. So let's get into the meat of the contracts. So your contracts should be your number one priority as a business owner, all right? It is your greatest tool, it is your greatest defense, and it is your greatest asset, okay? Without it, simply put, you are naked. Contracts really are the driving force of most business relationships. They're the thing that's going to protect your business in light of the business structure that you have. And we're always talking about preventative law here, never reactive. So Hollywood, a lot of the time, likes to glamorize, I'm going to sue you, I'm going to take you to court. That's not always the case in small businesses. And if you've ever maybe had a client conflict, you'll know that court is the last thing on the table for you. And it's really going to come down to what the foundations you put in place are and how strong your contracts are. Okay. Contracts that you have should not be cookie cutter. They really should be bespoke and unique to you. So before I go one step further, that hand-me-down contract that your friend gave you or your coach gave you, or that you stole from some colleague's website, or a DIY contract that you Googled and you put together yourself, or with ChatGPT, you're still really naked, okay? And we call these Frankenstein contracts. That's why there's a little Frankenstein here, because what happens is you might be the master of your industry and your business, and you might put a contract together, but it really is a Frankenstein contract because you don't know what's missing, okay? And I will say this is the value of working with someone that understands the horror stories of your industry, okay? So someone might come to me and they might not even know the problems that exist in their business because they've only been in business a year. But the lawyer who's maybe well-versed in that industry might say, well, you know what? A, B, C, D, E, F, G, all the way to X happened in all these other client stories that I heard. So we're going to build mechanisms in your contract that are going to protect you in the eventuality that these things can happen as well. Okay. So that's what a contract is. It's really saying, okay, if client does A, what's going to happen? So what's step 1, step 2, step 3, in order to basically deal with any potential issues, conflict, or miscommunications that can occur. All right. So the value of contracts, all right, this one, it might be an investment to get it right, but I want you to think of your offer, all right? So if you have a private offer worth $3,000 and then you sell it 10 times, the value of the contract is actually $30,000, okay? So you wanna make sure it protects you. Now, this is really rooted in a story that came across my desk a few years ago. It was an individual, they had an offer that was around this price point. They were new to business and it was a beta offer. They were just getting a bunch of people through the door to test the offer, see how it was going to work. They had no contracts, no business structure, no advisory team. They were just testing something. And this was pre-pandemic. And what happened at the beginning of the pandemic was panic, if you guys all remember, of course. And what happened is one of these beta clients that she had decided, you know what? I'm worried about money right now, and I want that money back from that experience that I did a year ago. And so they told someone else that was a beta client. And that person was like, yeah, me too. I'm really worried about the pandemic and whatever excuse they had going on in their head. And lo and behold, all beta clients, there was 10 or 15 of them, ended up going back to this particular service provider like a little army with like pitchforks. And we're like, we want a full refund. And unfortunately, the service provider had no contract and didn't have a lot to stand on, and had to actually refund a whole bucket of money that they didn't have in their possession at that time because a year had passed and they had spent it. And this is honestly the reality of so many small businesses, because if we bring $100 into our business, you know, at the beginning, that's $100 that goes to our groceries. It isn't $100 necessarily sitting in the bank that if somebody wants a refund 2 years later, that we readily have available for them, right? And here in Ontario, we have something called a statute of limitations, which maybe you're familiar with, but a statute of limitations essentially states in the courts how long you have to bring a claim, okay? So that means in Ontario, we have 2 years. So if you started a business 18 months ago and you were just testing the waters with this cute little venture you had and you didn't have any contracts or legal structures in place, somebody in theory is within their right to bring a claim against you within that 2 years. So it isn't so much that, oh, now I'm making more money, now I'm going to get protected. It's that you're really open to vulnerability from the beginning. So you want to make sure you have something in place, you understand what's happening from the beginning, because it can happen and it does happen. And if you talk to any lawyer or maybe somebody a few years ahead of you in business, you're going to hear the horror stories as well. In fact, one of my favorite questions is, what's happened to you? What's your horror story? What has kept you up at night? Because 90% of the clients are fantastic, but there's always one. There is one that will bring everything down, that will test your patience as a business owner. And that's the one that we care about when it comes to contracts. Okay, so I see some questions. I love it. Pop them in there and we're going to get to all of them. So the cardinal rule here is that you want to have contracts before invoice always. All right. Always. Now, if you're thinking of a time where you accepted money before you sent the contract, I'm sure all of you have an occasion like this. Don't do that, because it is contracts before invoice always. And this is really rooted in common law. We have 3 metrics that need to be hit in order to make a contract legally binding. The first is going to be an offer. That's where we give the contract over to the prospective client. Okay. Then we're going to have acceptance, where the client is then going to sign the contract accepting the offer. Then we have a third element, which is called consideration. And consideration is really what seals the deal and makes a contract legally binding. And this is typically most commonly in the format of value. So it will be maybe a financial number, which could be the invoice, so them actually paying you, or it could be value of you already starting the services and giving access to your program, giving access to the product, or whatever the case is. So the contract always needs to come first. All right. I know that a lot of business owners get really excited at the beginning and they're like, oh my God, someone wants to pay me. And they just like e-transfer me. And then they do the contract later. If it's too far apart, then we don't have a contract that's legally binding and it starts to get really messy with the timeline. So just make sure if there's anything that you tattoo on your forehead, it is contracts before invoice always. All right, so we are going to go over 7 contracts today. And the very last one I added in just this morning because of somebody I met yesterday evening at one of the BACD events, okay, who inspired me. And I was like, you know what, we should add that in there for you. So there's 7 contracts. So the first one is the service agreement. Then we're going to talk about website protection. Then we're going to talk about terms of purchase. We're going to talk about the confidentiality agreement, commonly known as like an NDA or non-disclosure. We're going to talk about a media release form, an independent contractor agreement, and the bonus, a waiver of liability. Okay. So let's start with our service agreement. So this is perhaps, well, in my biased opinion, my favorite contract, but also one of the most exciting ones in your business as well. So it's a legally binding document that helps you build out, create, and manage expectations when taking on new clients and performing services for them. Okay. So it's going to outline the details of your relationship, what you are providing, and importantly, what you are not providing. And I want to stop here because it is so important to know what is outside of scope, right? So if you've ever maybe been in a situation where things are teetering on scope creep, if you've even heard that term where you're like, this is extra, how do I even ask for money for this? You can already put in the contract and be like, listen, this is what we offer, this is what we don't. And if you want all this, that's fine, but it's going to cost you, X. So you can already start putting these mechanisms in place to avoid the conversations later that are awkward. It's important to know that the service agreement is a negotiable document, which means that if you receive one ever, you have the right to read it and review it and negotiate some of the things that you don't necessarily agree with before you sign it. All right. So, so it's really, I think a lot of people think this is a red flag when someone's negotiating contract. It's really just someone doing due diligence and making sure that their rights are being respected as much as yours. Okay. And the majority of your business policies are going to live in this agreement. So if you're new to business, it's really a great opportunity to start to figure out, what is your refund policy? How do you feel about interest? How do you feel about late payments? How do you feel about intellectual property? So there's a lot of questions you can go through and really create something that's bespoke. When we're looking at your product suite and all the different offers that you have that you're giving, you want to just remember the rule of thumb is that one contract for every offer. Okay, so it isn't a one size fits all. It's not that if we have one service agreement, it's good for everything. That is rarely the case. It's usually one contract for every single thing that you offer. Okay, so this is really when we're dealing with services. Maybe you have, a one-day package where you're doing everything one day, or maybe you have a longer container where you're offering services on an ongoing basis. Maybe you're paid per project, maybe you're paid per hour, maybe you're paid per retainer. Each one of these will lend themselves to very different terms. And so you just want to make sure that whatever the way you've structured your offer or your service, that you have a contract that's going to fill that. Okay. So it should be highly customized. And it's going to really be a preventative protection for your client conflicts moving forward, right? When we're talking about client conflicts, I know a lot of the time we get into a situation where a client maybe doesn't want to pay us or doesn't want to do something. At that point, we look back to the contract and we say, listen, you and I both signed this agreement and it says this. So my hands are tied just as much as yours, right? So if you have a client that's like, oh, why didn't you give me a refund? I don't know, because I legally also signed up to not give you one in the contract. So you didn't negotiate it out beforehand. So it's law between us now. So it's a really good buffer to be able to kind of handle these conflicts that come up. And the more customized it is, the more mechanisms that you build into it, the more that you're basically going to have a roadmap of how to deal with every potential horror story that comes up. Okay. And you're basically just designing a dream relationship. So this is your service agreement. Now, the next one we're going to talk about is website protection. So website protection is really important because we have actually 3 contracts under website protection. So if you are operating in today's entrepreneurship landscape, the chances of you having a website is very, very high. Either it's for personal branding, to sell your stories, your blogs, for example, if you're a writer, to promote your offerings. So there's 3 contracts you're going to want to consider to have on your website. All right. 2 are highly, highly required. Recommended, and 1 is required. So the first is your terms and conditions. This is a highly recommended document. It's not legally required under statute, but it really has a good, strong place to be on your website. It's going to outline how the website should be used by the user. So anyone coming to your website at any point, whether you know them or don't know them, they're users, and it's going to tell them what they can or cannot do on your website. So something like this could be protecting your intellectual property. So instead of someone coming and just copy and pasting all of your testimonials that you receive and then throwing them on theirs, Well, your terms and conditions is going to say, no, don't do that. Okay. It's also going to maybe outline some of your business policies. So let's say you run an e-commerce store, okay, and you're selling products online. Well, your terms and conditions might be the first place you talk about shipping and handling, right? Damaged products. So these things need to be easily translated to the customer coming, how they can handle with a product that arrived to them that maybe wasn't what they ordered. It would be in your terms and conditions. If any of you run some type of membership platform and you want the right to ban abusive content. So let's say someone's coming on your membership platform or your Facebook group or wherever you're hosting this group. And a lot of people maybe have very strong opinions that don't agree with your moral compass or your code or the code of your company. You want to give yourself the right to be able to delete those comments. Okay. And that's how you give yourself the right, is through the terms and conditions. So it's really great at limiting your liability as well on your social media channels. So a lot of times people ask me, how do I protect what I post on Instagram? Or how do I protect what I post on LinkedIn? Or even TikTok at this point? We do that protection through your website, okay? So I want you to think of your website as maybe a brick and mortar store. The brick and mortar store will probably have a binder somewhere behind the checkout that says all the policies of how the company is going to be run. And your social media is maybe just going to be a little car with decal all over it, driving around the city, bringing back traffic, okay? Your social media is the car. It's just bringing back traffic to your business. So even if someone doesn't come to your website, you can protect the social media through the terms and conditions and limit your liability that way. So it's really important to have this and strongly recommended. The second one is your privacy policy. So this one is legally required under Canadian statutes, so under PIPEDA laws. It's also legally required jurisdictionally in many, many other countries around the world. So you may have heard of GDPR, which is the European Data Protection Regulation, CalOPA, which is the United States version. So it is very much a legal requirement for you to have a privacy policy on your website. What it's going to do is it's going to tell your user how you're gathering information and how you plan to use it. Okay. So this information is going to include cookies. So any kind of Google Analytics or Monster Insights that your website is collecting requires you to have a privacy policy. Any emails that you might be collecting for a newsletter requires you to have a privacy policy, or any payment information. So if you have e-commerce and you're taking credit cards as payment, you're going to need a privacy policy. So this is honestly, if there's any takeaway, you need to have a privacy policy on your website. You can be fined by the Canadian government. They are cracking down a little bit harder on websites that don't have this. So make sure you have a privacy policy on your website. Lastly is your disclaimer. So the disclaimer is also a recommended policy on the website. A lot of websites have this either in the terms and conditions or separately. It's really all about limiting your liability. So for example, if you run a, let's say you run a weight loss company or something like that, and you have, Janet, and Janet is your star testimonial, and Janet lost, 300 pounds using your program. Well, you want a disclaimer that basically says results are not guaranteed. All right. Whoever we promote were exceptional candidates and they had such great results based on a series of factors and not just using our product. So you want a disclaimer that's going to protect you. Maybe you're in the business of making other people money. Well, you want a disclaimer that's also going to say, yeah, even though Jonathan made $1 million using our course or whatever the case is, results are not guaranteed. It really depends how much effort you put into it and how many other things kind of bring up the success of being able to make $1 million, and we don't guarantee that. So it's a very strong thing to just make sure that you're always limiting your liability and saying, yes, we have a great product, we believe in it, but it doesn't always do what we say it does. Okay. When we say it does, are exceptional testimonials. All right. So your website protection policies always live at the footer of your website. Okay, so I just put a little snippet here. This is maybe the footer of some website that I found. And basically you're going to have your terms, your privacy policy, and your disclaimer. The legal requirement here in Canada is that each one is clearly displayed and clearly clickable. So you want to be able to click them individually. It doesn't matter that the user on your website hasn't signed anything. By virtue of them being there and clicking, they would have already agreed to them. So you just have to make sure that it's available to them. Okay. Perfect. Now, if you don't believe me, because I think some of you might think, well, obviously not every client's going to lose 300 pounds, Elena, right? Well, I want to introduce you to the McDonald's lady. Excuse me. Has anyone ever heard of the McDonald's lady? If you have, just tell me in the chat, because this is a fantastic story. This is a woman who went through a McDonald's drive-through and she ordered a hot coffee. Okay. And this hot coffee Ended up, as she was exiting the drive-thru, she ended up spilling it on herself and she got burned. And she decided, oh my goodness, this hot coffee burned me. I'm going to sue McDonald's for not putting a disclaimer on their coffee cups telling me that it was hot. Okay. Now, there's a series of facts. She had third-degree burns. She was 90 years old. It was a very serious complication for her, but she won $2.9 million over the premise that the McDonald's coffee cup didn't say hot on it. Okay. And so now you'll notice the majority of takeaway coffee cups will have a little hot or chaud, in French, at the bottom of them, telling you and disclaiming to you that it is hot. And it is really just them limiting their liability. So even if something seems common sense, like, duh, don't do that, you still have to put it in legal writing to say, well, we warned you that it's hot. Okay. So it's always err on the side of everyone isn't as intelligent or subscribes to the same common sense as you would assume they do. You really have to spell it out when it comes to the law. Okay. Perfect. So let's move on to our terms of purchase. All right. So our terms of purchase is also a very, very exciting contract. All right. If at any point you're excited by anything, this is the one I want you to be excited about. So when we think of contracts, we traditionally think of a contract that we slide across the table and it requires a wet signature, some kind of signing. The terms of purchase puts this a little bit on its head because the terms of purchase is going to be the checkbox contract. So if at any point you've ever purchased anything online, maybe a ticket to go see Taylor Swift or anything from Sephora or any kind of, ticket to a comedy show, whatever the case is, you may have clicked a box when you're putting your credit card information in that says you agree to the terms and conditions or the terms of purchase. Okay. Interchangeable words, same idea. And you would have clicked that box. If you don't click that box, it doesn't allow you to make the payment. Okay. So what this is essentially a service agreement without a signature. By clicking the box, it'll essentially state how the purchaser can utilize your product. It's going to outline your sales policy, your payment policy, refund, shipping, any disclaimers, liability protections, and intellectual property that you want to protect. So if you're doing anything online or you have a service that has an automated checkout process, then you're going to want to consider terms of purchase. It's going to look very much like the service agreement, but the verbiage is going to read a little bit more neutral to effect for certain different policies that are happening, right? So if you have an e-commerce store where you have multiple products, the purchase price is always going to change. So the terms of purchase will reflect that. If you're maybe some kind of, do coaching and it's the same product over and over again, but you want to have a very seamless customer experience, then the terms of purchase would allow you to do that too. Okay. So it's great for e-commerce, membership sites, e-courses, digital products, ticket sales, live events, anything you're doing online, you're going to want to have a terms of purchase in place. Okay. It's one of my favorite documents as well. All right. So our confidentiality agreement. All right. So this one's also commonly referred to as a non-disclosure agreement. So an NDA. So I'm sure the majority of you have heard of an NDA. It's thrown around in Hollywood a lot as well, but it also matters at the small business level. Okay. So I want you to think about confidentiality as a legal privilege. And there's different ways that confidentiality kind of exists on the legal landscape. So if we say, oh, it's a secret to your bestie, it's not really a secret, because if someone comes and knocks on the door and asks for that information, we have no way to protect it. In the regular workspace, doctors and lawyers are really the only ones awarded the highest legal protections towards confidential information or privileged information. So if you've ever gone to a doctor, you'll know that the medical records and anything you talk about in that room with them is sealed, right? And they can't talk about it. So even if the police come and they knock and they're like, we need to know about that conversation, a doctor cannot tell them, right? Can't release those medical records. It's the same with a lawyer. Anything that you discuss with a lawyer is highly confidential. And even if the police come, we cannot disclose that information. Only if a judge put something forward that they want something very, very specific, only in that case can we maybe release something. You'll also notice if you've ever been to a therapy session, they'll tell you too, everything is confidential, but there's an exception. And the exception with therapy is always if you plan on harming yourself or others, they have a legal right to, a due diligence right, to actually report that. So there's all these different understandings of confidentiality. So if you want to create a bubble of protection between you and a client. Maybe you're dealing with a high level CEO, or maybe you're dealing with a celebrity client, or maybe you're dealing with somebody you're discussing very personal information like finances. You might want to create this very strong protection through a confidentiality agreement or a non-disclosure agreement. And it's going to create a confidential relationship between you and the client that cannot be penetrated unless either one of you decides to sign off. Okay. So even if the police come and knock on your door, you're like, but I have an NDA with this person. I actually cannot say anything unless they give me the right to say something. Okay. So it's a great opportunity. It's also a great opportunity if you're doing hiring. So if you're bringing on contractors, employees, you're expanding your team, and you want to make sure that they protect all of your client information, they protect your trade secrets, they protect certain documents that maybe you're using that's like really your like golden formula, you can get them to sign a confidentiality agreement as well to live on in perpetuity. So even if they leave the company, they are still sworn to secrecy under this agreement. Okay. So it's fantastic for vulnerable information, hiring, and specific client relationships, right? We add this in a lot of different places. And just to give you an example, just the other day, I was working with a fitness instructor who you would think, why does a fitness instructor need a confidentiality agreement? Well, they work with a lot of actually Toronto-based celebrities and influencers that like to tell them the tea during their workout sessions. And so they wanted to make sure that that was a safe space, right? You'll see some hairdressers also, if they have really high clients, they might sign NDAs so that they can also just speak freely. So it can be used in a variety of different ways. Perfect. So moving on, we have our media release form. All right, so this one is also very interesting. It's a legally binding document that gives you ownership over media and content. All right, so if we are working on an online space, right? The majority of us have some online marketing of some kind or another. Let's say we've provided services to our client, and they're going to give us back a testimonial, right? And so a couple of years ago, it was very popular to even get video testimonials. If you see that every once in a while, you're going to want to get them to sign a media release, because if we think about a client giving us a video testimonial, just think about it for a second. This client, they did their own hair and makeup. They did their own costume design. They did, film directing and set. They did the video shooting. They maybe did some editing. I mean, for all intents and purposes, they've done all of the work and they own that media 100%. So if you want to take this and edit it and put it somewhere, you need them to release the rights of that media to you. Because let's say somebody gave me a video testimonial that basically said, Elena had a great smile, but, she had bad breath, but, I really liked working with her, and I cut out the bad breath thing. What I'm doing is I'm misrepresenting what they've said about me now. So in order for me to be able to edit that and do what I want with it, I need to get full ownership of that content. So another great example is podcasting. So podcasting, if anyone has a podcast, you're going to, someone's going to invite you on as a guest, or you'll have them as guests. You're essentially asking for ownership over their audio. So you're asking for them to give you, ownership of the voice for you to edit and manipulate that podcast however you want. Because if it turns around and your podcast tomorrow becomes the next Joe Rogan podcast and you're making $1 million an episode, you don't want that guest to come back to you and be like, hey, I own my audio, so therefore you have to pay me a certain commission or the royalties of that particular episode that you've made in your business. So we want to make sure that we protect this. Now, if you remember a real life story as well, Nirvana is probably one of the more famous cases. So Nirvana had a baby on one of their CD album pictures back in the early 90s. And this baby grew up and became 21 years old and decided to sue Nirvana because this baby could not sign away a media release. Of course, it was under the age of 18 and a whole other set of reasons. But went and said, listen, all the money you made off of the CD with me as the cover, I am entitled to a percentage of that. And so actually sued Nirvana for this. Now, already, because I've already told you the statute of limitations was much longer, right? 20 years or so, much longer than the particular jurisdictional statute of limitations they had. So he didn't actually have a claim. But on the short term, you want to make sure you're protecting yourself for this, okay? So media release is perfect for photography, videography, voice, and written word, okay? So another great example would be if you're having events, you're doing any kind of conference or live speaking event, and maybe you have a videographer or someone coming in to take pictures of your event and everybody, you're going to want to have all of your participants sign a media release form prior to attending the event to make sure that they're comfortable being on camera or being on film, and for you to basically advertise and use them to continue to advertise and use your business. So it's used for a lot of different and great ways. And what I'm going to say is the media release can also be a standalone page, right? So maybe it's not a client, maybe there's no money exchange, but maybe they're a friend coming to model for your company and they're doing you a favor. You can have it as a standalone, Or we can take the media release and we can throw it. I'm going to go back. We can throw it in the terms of purchase. So when they buy tickets to our live event, a portion of the terms of purchase will discuss the media release and basically advise them, well, we're taking pictures of you, okay? If it's a paying client, I'm going to go back even more, we can throw it in the service agreement, the media release. So it can be a part of other agreements as well, depending on the type of relationship that you're building and what you want to be doing with these marketing materials that you're creating, okay? Media release is really, really important. Okay. Now, we're growing our team. Oh, it's the same picture, but we are growing our team. I'm so proud of you guys. We really made it such a long way in your entrepreneurial journey, and you're getting your first contractor, okay? So when you hire a contractor, this is one very, very, very different than an employee. And I'm going to tell you the difference between a contractor and an employee in a second. But when you're bringing someone onto your team, you're going to want to give them some type of agreement that outlines the terms of the relationship that you're bringing them on for, okay? Now, an independent contractor agreement is not the same as an employee agreement. And here in Ontario and a lot of other jurisdictions, we have very, very, very strict laws of how you can classify a worker of your company, okay? If it looks and smells like an employee, then it is an employee, all right? So the way that we understand the difference between a contractor and an employee is kind of a 4-part test, all right? When you have an employee, you will know, perhaps you'll know, or you've been an employee, that you're going to get payroll, there's going to be a salary, a portion of what they pay you is going to have to go to CPP and EI contributions, they're going to retain a bit of tax in order for them, and it's going to cost money to have an employee because effectively you have to pay more to have this employee. So a lot of people think, oh, I'm just going to do the contractor route because if they bill me $100, I pay them $100 and we'll call it a day. But the thing is, the CRA, so the Canadian Revenue Agency, really sees these as two different relationships, two different relationships. So I want you to think, in order to have rights over an employee, it's this 4-part test to say, okay, well, I'm going to tell the employee where to work, right? So you have to come to this location. I'm going to tell them how long they have to stay there. Okay. So you cannot leave this location between the hours of 9 to 5. You have to be here. I'm going to give you the equipment to do the work. So you're definitely going to be sitting at this desk with this computer in order to do this work. Okay. And I'm probably going to tell you how to dress because now you work at McDonald's and you have to wear a very specific uniform. Okay. So for me to have the rights over you to do these things, you're going to be considered an employee. Whereas a contractor, if we think of maybe a plumber, for example, the most basic contractor, plumber is going to tell you when he's going to show up. He's like, oh, I'll be there sometime on Tuesday. You know, he shows up when he wants. The location changes all of the time. Okay. The equipment, the plumber is going to bring all of his own specialized equipment and he's going to do the job how he wants to do it. And in terms of uniform, plumber gets to decide what he's going to wear. Okay. So when we're bringing on different team members, you have to be very, very careful of what categorization they fall into. So if we have someone like a virtual assistant, that can be a contractor. If we have someone managing a front desk of a brick and mortar, that's an employee. Okay. So you have to really understand the difference and make sure if you don't talk to either your lawyer, your accountant, or even maybe your bookkeeper a little bit, they'll be able to tell you where someone falls under because there's going to be very different tax consequences related to this business decision that you're going to be making. Okay. But otherwise, if we get the go ahead that we're bringing on a contractor and they're going to maybe help us for a very specialized project because we have a social media agency and we need someone to come build out the SEO portion, perfect. It's a per project situation. They're specialized in that skill and they're going to be contractors and you might want to give them that independent contractor agreement. Okay, hope that was clear. All right, our bonus waiver of liability. Okay, so I know I see you smiling, so I know that you know that this is for you. But one of the most important legal documents, depending on the type of business that you run, okay? So the waiver of liability isn't necessarily for everybody, but what it is, it's if you're doing anything that has some type of risk associated with it or implied risk, what you want to do is protect you and your business by essentially getting your client or your customer to waive certain rights of protection that they may have, okay? You're essentially getting them to say, I know there's a risk, I'm aware of it, you told me, and if anything goes wrong, I won't hold you responsible. That's all it really is. So when we're thinking of risky businesses, we think of live events. So if you are doing a conference or a retreat or you're getting a bunch of people together in any in-person capacity, your risk goes up. And the risk could be someone tripping over a wire or a carpet and breaking their leg. Whose fault is that? right? So if we're doing live events, we start falling into whose fault is that? Do we need insurance? Who's signing the waiver of liability? So we want to make sure that we're mitigating risk at all times. If we're doing retreats, same thing. First of all, retreats. I know we have a TICO certified agent here in our group. So definitely if you're doing anything that requires travel or accommodation of any kind as part of your business plan, because I know a lot of small businesses aspire to have this, you need to be working with a TICO regulated professional, and they're going to explain that to you. But you're also going to want to have a waiver of liability, because who's responsible for the transportation? If someone's getting in a car or an airport pickup, who's responsible for that, right? So you want to have a waiver of liability in those instances. Physical activities is another big one. So this is inherent if you're doing anything fitness, dance related, swimming, hiking, outdoors activity. So you're going to have your required insurance, but you're going to double up on that by having a waiver of liability that says you understand that there's risk here, right? So swimming, the cause of swimming can be drowning, can be death. Like you understand that these are things that are present. And then if you're not feeling well, please do not do this. Even if I'm telling you to do it, sit down and don't do it, right? Take full responsibility for yourself. Same with dancing. Maybe you're dancing with individuals of a certain age and the health risk becomes very considerate and very significant. You want to say, listen, I am not a medical doctor by any means. And so if there is an issue prevalent, I'm not going to ask you, it's not my job, but you are responsible for yourself. And if you have some ailment that occurs in this physical activity or in this dance class, that's on you, right? Mental activities is going to be another one. So if you're doing anything like life coaching, mindset coaching, advisement of any kind, anything that would, even meditation classes, breath work classes, all of these are borderline physical and mental, and they can release a lot of trauma, right? So a lot of people have a lot of trauma responses, and depending on the type of work you do, that can bring out really significant reactions in people. So you want to make sure you have a waiver of liability. And if you're doing anything in the healthcare world, nutritionist, dietitian, if you anything in the healthcare, you want to consider a waiver of liability in addition to your documents, just to say, look, I'm giving you guidance or I'm giving you advice on this. There's no guarantee it's going to work, and you understand all the risks associated with it, right? So just the other day, we had somebody across my desk that was offering fertility advice. They're no way at all affiliated or have any certification. They're just sharing their story in a public speaking situation. And they wanted to say, this is my personal story. None of this is advice, and all, you take your own responsibility for what's happening. So a waiver of liability is a really, really great thing to add to the business, depending on how it evolves and the type of activities or services that you're offering. So as a final caveat, it's time to become obsessed with your contracts. I know that I'm very biased. I love them. It is what I do all day long. And so your contracts are a really, really exciting part of your business. And they are constantly evolving part of your business. So I want to kind of leave you with a few takeaways. And some of these are going to be, this is not an exhaustive list of all the contracts available. Every business is unique. The things that you might need are going to be different than your friend's business or, your colleague's business or whatever the case is. So you always want to make sure you're getting advice on the contracts that might be right for your business, that work for you, depending on the type of services or project that you're working on. Okay. The other thing is, it's not a one-stop shop. Like, the law of your business is an evolving process as you grow. So when you buy contracts, and I alluded at the beginning, I have that business contracts for entrepreneurs. So those, if you purchase those, the idea is that in a year or 2 years, you would have outgrown them, right? If you go to a lawyer and you get a contract, the idea is in a couple of years, your business would have evolved and changed. You would have experienced more things, and you're going to want to update those contracts. So a really good touch point is to build that advisory team, and with your lawyer, check in every year, every 2 years, every 3 years as your business grows and develops. And also check in with your lawyer and be like, have you heard more horror stories of my industry that we should be adding in particular causes to protect, right? Because your lawyer gets the inside scoop on hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of business models, right? If they're any good. And so they might be able to put protections in place for you that you haven't even thought of. And then they're willing to learn from you as well, how you deal through your business. So become obsessed with them, keep them updated, use them, and get very excited about them. If you'd like to stay connected, here's all my information. And I'm going to go and answer some of the questions. Is that okay, Ashley?
Yeah, for sure. I can help you navigate them unless you have it up on your screen.
I have the chat open, but if you guys have any comments, questions, anything, drop them in there now, and maybe I'll go in order.
Yeah, for sure. I can read them out if you want. It might be easier. Let me just see.
Okay, yes, I don't lose any.
Okay. Okay. Okay, so first question, which country's jurisdiction is recommended when dealing with international suppliers? And my company is in Canada.
I
So
love that question.
yeah, Canada or supplier's local country.
Fantastic. So this is a very common question, actually. And so you need to ask, where is my business located and where is my business registered? So if you have an Ontario provincially registered business, then the jurisdiction of all of your legal contracts will always be Ontario. I find that when we're dealing with international clients or international suppliers or international vendors, they are going to negotiate prior to signing to have that jurisdiction moved to their location. Okay. That is only a disadvantage to you. The reason we have jurisdiction is a few reasons, and it's going to be one, I want this contract to be read under Ontario law because that's the reason, I got this contract drafted under Ontario law. I want it to be legible under Ontario law and construed and interpreted under Ontario law. But also, if anything goes wrong, I want us to deal with the conflict in Ontario. So if at any point I have to take you to court, then you, my friend, that might be in another country, you have to come to Ontario in order to deal with it. So it's only advantageous for you to keep your business and all of your legal relationships in the same jurisdiction, okay? If you expand or have multiple businesses in other jurisdictions, then you can decide what relationships you want to have. But where your business is registered is where your jurisdiction should be, and these two should always match.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, next, Nicole. So if clients are buying services online, they don't actually sign the agreement, but it is on the website. Do you have anything to add to that? I'm not sure if you covered it. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think we did cover it a little bit, right? Because so you have the two options. And so when you go to a lawyer, well, at least if you come to me, I don't know what other people do, but if you come to me, I would ask, how exactly are you doing your onboarding? And do we want the wet signature? Do we want to maybe send a DocuSign and get them to sign it? Or are we doing an automated checkout process? Maybe you've subscribed to like a Dubsado or Go High Level or some other software that allows it to be integrated. And then we would draft the contract based off of how you're going to be receiving that acceptance piece. Okay. So it isn't so much to say I have a contract that gets a wet signature and I throw it here. That's not going to work, because if you throw it in the automated system, you're going to need to have very specific verbiage to read it in that particular mannerism. But I think we covered it. So you're looking at a terms of purchase.
Okay, great. So Chantel is asking, how often should you get your legal contracts reviewed, and do you do that?
So yes, so I love it. So you guys are so ahead of the game. So I already answered it too, which is fantastic. So yes, we do contract reviews of documents. And then I would say, just kind of reiterating, the best thing is always get your contract updated when you evolve your business. And if your business stays relatively the same, every 2 to 3 years, I would say is maybe a good touch point. But since you're a wealthy, successful entrepreneur and you're having lunch with your lawyer all of the time, then you can have these conversations with your lawyer and they'll be able to tell you, you know what, it's time that we do this. I think that, they're looking a little old, or maybe the law has evolved or changed, or maybe there's new things that have happened in your particular industry that we need to be considering.
Okay, great. Alyssa has a couple of questions here. So one, how would the media release work in terms of social media? And
okay,
then,
so yeah. Should I answer that one? So, so there's a lot of different ways to answer this, but one, if you're trying to protect what you post on social media, then you're going to want to have a terms and conditions on your website protecting it. 2, if you're looking to get content from another party that you want to be posting on your social media, then I would get them to sign a very simple media release. 3, if they're a client of yours or there's some financial exchange to them, you can have the media release already ingrained in a previous contract that you have with them. So there's a couple of ways of doing it, but the most important thing is, do I want ownership over something you're giving me? If yes, then I want the media release. I will say a caveat to this that surprises a lot of people is, if you ever hire a website designer or a graphic designer or like a logo or branding specialist, they own, under intellectual property laws, like they own everything they give you. So if you want full ownership of whatever they give you, like just because someone created a logo for you and gave it to you, the person who created it owns it under Canadian law. So if you want ownership of these things, then you're going to need to consider some type of intellectual property arrangement that can formulate like a media release.
Okay. Should the waiver of liability be included in the terms of purchase on an e-commerce website?
So yes and no. So you're not looking at a waiver of liability so much as you're looking at a limitation of liability. It's a bit different. But what you're doing is you're limiting your liability in very specific instances on an e-commerce website. And yes, it would form part of your terms of purchase, which is the checkbox contract, and also part of your terms and conditions, which would live at the footer of your website. So if I was you and I had an e-commerce website, I would consider getting all of them drafted at the same time so that they all talk to each other. Okay. That would be the best, is if your legal all speaks to each other and doesn't contradict. Be careful of contradictory clauses.
Great. So in terms of skincare, how different is the waiver to a disclaimer, and is a disclaimer sufficient for an e-commerce website?
Okay, so such a good question. So if you are doing skincare as its own bucket, and be careful if you're selling to the United States. I will say that if you're selling to the United States, it's another conversation. But if you are selling just e-commerce, let's keep it very simple. If you're selling e-commerce, you're going to want to have a very strong disclaimer regarding sensitivities, allergens, ingredients, anything that might be happening, and having very strong labeling that adheres to Canadian government laws on the ingredients that are part of your skincare. So that's going to be in the disclaimer on your website. If your skincare company decides to do trade shows, and maybe you're doing kind of like sampling, at that point, you're going to want to have a waiver of liability. So if you're hosting an event, you're going to want to have a waiver of liability that people trying things on, that if they get a skin allergic reaction, like right then and there, that you're protecting yourself, or having some kind of signage on your maybe trade show table that has a waiver of liability and a disclaimer kind of combo there that's very public, so that you're being very cautious of anything in person.
So question, so they don't have to necessarily sign it. If let's say I'm doing a market and I'm offering samples, they don't have to sign anything, but I could have like a physical sign there that's clearly visible that says, hey, if you have any immediate sensitivities, I'm not liable, kind of thing. Like they don't have to physically sign anything.
So they don't have to, so it depends. But in the scenario that you just provided, the best case would be to have a sign that you said that's clearly visible on the table, like front and center, really. I know it's going to look not pretty, put your logo on it, but you would have to have that to protect yourself, because you really can't. Fragrance allergies are very serious these days. Certain allergens, I mean, we're very sensitive individuals. So, and I would make it a policy that if you're doing anything in person, you're asking them prior to getting them to test the product. So if at any time you're literally grabbing someone's hand and putting the product on them, I would ask them. You're a small business, so you really you don't have the funds to maybe take this all the way to court. So just make sure you're taking the extra cautions of saying, any allergens I need to know? No, okay, I'm going to put it on you, right? Or here's my ingredient list. Take a look at that and review it prior to testing out the products.
One last question. So let's just say it was like a verbal, I'm asking them, are you okay with trying a sample? How can that be like held up if someone wanted to come after like the company? Like, so, because there's no written like confirmation, like it's my word against theirs kind of thing. So if it's just like a verbal yes or no, is that still able to withstand in?
Yeah. So there's legislation now. I mean, it's a much bigger question, but there's legislation now that allows even an emoji to be legally binding. So verbal agreements and handshake deals are still very legally binding. You have to be very careful. What I think would happen if it went all that way for you would be the integrity of the rest of your business. Did you have the contracts everywhere else to back up the fact that you are an ethical business owner that would have more likely than not made this request at the time? If you're just saying, yeah, I did this, but you have absolutely nothing to back you up in any other format, then I think that kind of answers that question too. Perfect.
Thank you. Okay. Next question. How can waiver of liability be applied when selling healthcare goods through Amazon?
Okay, perfect. So if you're selling through Amazon,
I don't know if Amazon has their own.
They have their own policies. So you would have to, but that's a really good question. I don't have the immediate answer to how Amazon does the interworkings of their backend. I know that you would have a disclaimer on your product description But Amazon is one of those funny ones that doesn't actually have the checkbox contract when you check out. They have a very quick purchase, but that's also because they don't subscribe to Ontario law. So they subscribe to a different jurisdictional law. And so I would say, if you want to talk about it more in detail, just message me. But I would say at the very basic, you would need a disclaimer in your product description. And once again, same like what we were telling Alyssa, to have the ingredient list and any other allergen information, and make sure that you adhere to government regulations on labeling on all of your products.
Thank you. Next, how does it work for the media I collect in the photo booth? Do I own that media? I guess it's a photo booth business.
I love this. So it depends on what you do. So it depends on what your contract says. So if you want to own it, you can do that. And if you don't want to own it, you can also do that. So that is an election that you have to make. Common law states that whoever creates the product would own the product. So in theory, without anything to the contrary, your photo booth would own all the images.
Okay. Question from Nicole. Are non-compete agreements for contractors and employees actually enforceable?
Okay, so this is a big one. So yes and no. So yes and no. So a lot of legislation changed in this landscape a few years ago, and it's been a big thing that non-competition clauses aren't valid. There's now very specific testing related to non-competes that can be upheld or not upheld. So if you are, I'm going to pick on McDonald's. If you just work at McDonald's, no, it's not upheld. You can go work at another McDonald's or Wendy's and call it a day, you're fine. If you are the CEO of McDonald's and a very key vital player, then in that case, yes, a non-compete would stand, because you couldn't take all of McDonald's knowledge and then go apply to Wendy's. All right. So not to pick on those businesses, but it depends on your proximity to the success of the business. And then for brick and mortars, it depends a lot on geographical location. So if you have a dance studio and you wanted to make sure that all of your dancers that you trained wouldn't, the dance teachers that you trained couldn't take all of that knowledge to the dance studio across the street, then yes, you could have a non-competition within a geographical location of maybe 50 kilometers that person cannot provide services in for a limited amount of time. But unless they're not a key personnel, then no. So it depends. And then I think the length of a non-compete, like, you need to be very reasonable. So even if you're the CEO of McDonald's trying to bring everything over to Wendy's, I mean, the maximum that we see that's realistic for non-competes is 5 years, right? If we're thinking maybe that dance teacher example I gave, maybe we're looking at a 6-month non-compete. So in theory, they don't do a lot of validity to small businesses. So more often than not, we don't include them. Okay. What you should care about more is non-solicitation, which is anybody you hire stealing your clients.
That makes sense. Okay. Question from Chantel. How does business and liability insurance work with legal contracts?
So insurance is its own regulation scheme. We don't deal with insurance at all. So we recommend you get insurance, and we recommend that you speak to an insurance provider, but I can't speak on insurance.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so Nicole, she's also the dance teacher here. So just to give you some context. So every client that purchases a class online has to check off our media release box. For those who randomly come to events, I have a notice at the front desk that indicates we have an implied media release. If they attend the event, they imply consent. Is this okay?
Yes, it's okay. If it is clearly at the front door prior to them entering the space, the implied consent is them entering the space. Okay. So a lot of these things, sometimes just because someone didn't sign it, they didn't even read it, it doesn't matter, as long as they were made noticeably aware of the signage prior to doing so. So yeah,
it's actually on the desk right next, like when I'm collecting the money, it's right there. And if it's somebody new, I'll point it out, and I'll say, if you come in, there's going to be video, pictures, and that's going to be used on social media, and you're giving me consent to use it.
Exactly. I would say that the only distinction for you would be if someone was like, I really want to join your class, but I really don't feel comfortable, and they really gave you advance notice, then I think at that point, it's up to you and your discretion to allow them to continue with the class or not, right?
Yes.
So then you can decide, okay, we'll take pictures of everyone but you, or
Yes.
actually no, we have a
So I do
videographer.
have one customer that does that and I just exclude her from
Yeah.
all the, okay, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, next. Okay, I know we're at 2 o'clock, so a couple more questions. Oh,
yeah.
how are you for time?
I am okay. Apologize to everyone
Okay.
else.
No,
but
there's
yeah,
lots
I'm
of great
okay.
questions, so we'll just get through a couple, and then otherwise the rest they can reach out to you.
Yeah.
So Renee, this is fantastic, Elena, and I love that you love contracts. What should you do if someone shows up at your event with cash for payment and they've not been to your website to sign off on the media release? Just have printed copies, ? And if so, would this be for everything like terms, etc.?
So I think one, how did they find you, right? So the first thing would be how they found you. So if they found you through your website, in theory, you would have a terms and conditions on your website that is going to imply what some of those payment details are going to be, some of your intellectual property, right? So that's great. Now, two, depending on the event, if people just show up, you can do kind of what Nicole's doing, have a sign right where you're collecting payment that says just, here's what you need to know about the event, kind of our housekeeping rules. And then depending on the nature of the project, so maybe I see a lot of people that are like photographers or videographers and they're doing like a shoot that they really want to create a body of work from. In an instance like that, then I would 100% be having paper copies with you and make sure that everyone there is really releasing their rights to being there and also happy to have their media, given over to you for you to use how you like. So it depends on the nature of what you're doing.
Okay, thanks so much. If I could just say, it's usually friends that invite other friends, and it might be like for a children's program. That's just an area that I volunteer in. So that's one area where I know sometimes people just show up.
So children are, I think, yeah, definitely message me when you talk about it, because children, anything under 18 is a different ball game altogether, and you need to err on the side of like caution beyond caution of what you can imagine. Yeah.
Thank you. Next question. If I create budgets or forecasts for businesses, is a waiver of liability recommended since forecasts are not perfect?
So what I would do for you is I would have a strong disclaimer at the beginning of every spreadsheet that you offer. So if you're creating a forecast on some kind of like, let's say Google Sheets or something, the first page should really have a strong disclaimer. And it should also link to your other agreements that you have and maybe refer to what you have. You don't necessarily need a waiver of liability in that instance, depending on the vulnerability of the client and kind of some of the nature of what you're talking about. But the disclaimer should be what you're looking at.
Okay, great. Next question, can a contract be signed as an individual instead of as a business or setting up a company?
Okay, so big question. So we didn't talk about business foundations or structures at all in this call. And in fact, if you want, I do these talks regularly in other instances, so reach out to me and maybe I can send you a recording. But in Canada, we have maybe two different business structures that you want to consider. One's a corporation, one's a sole proprietor. So if you are a sole proprietor, you are an individual, you and your business are one. If you are operating under your full legal name, then you need to sign every contract under your full legal name. If you are operating your business under, like Elena's Lemonade Stand, this is different than what's on my birth certificate. So I would need to register this name as a sole proprietorship, and then I could sign contracts under Elena's Lemonade Stand, okay? I cannot sign a contract under Elena's Lemonade Stand if I have not registered this, and I cannot market myself as Elena's Lemonade Stand unless I've registered it. If you are a corporation, on the other hand, what you've done is you've created a whole new person in the eyes of the law. So you and your business are separate, okay? With a corporation, you need to be very careful to not sign anything individually ever. You want to make sure your corporation is always signing and is the one entering every contractual relationship. So it depends on your situation and the business structure you have, but I would say that would be an area where you want to be getting advisement on what would be considered personal, what would be considered corporate.
Sorry, I just have a quick question about that. So let's just say you have a corporation and it's like a number corporation. Are you signing it as like a
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like as the signature on the bottom, not the individual name?
So the signature at the bottom, so you're going to have the line for the signature. It's going to say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Holding Inc. And then authorizing party will be your full legal name. And then it's going to have legal verbiage. It says that you have authority to bind the corporation. So it's a much longer signing process.
Okay, and Elena, just to follow up on that, the question was like for the pilot, I'm thinking about doing a test first. So I was thinking, can I just do an agreement under my own name prior to setting up a company and going through that whole process, just to know like whether it would be a successful project or not?
Yeah, so here in Canada, it's one of the easiest places to set up a business worldwide. Like, we're very, very fortunate. And the government basically says you can start a business today as long as you use your full legal name. And that is setting up a business. So you don't need a separate bank account, you don't need a registration. If you use and the full legal name has to be what's on your birth certificate. So I know that there's many cultures that maybe come here that have different names that are different than what's on their birth certificate. That's not going to work either. It has to be what is on your birth certificate as your full legal name. And then that's how you could open up the business and operate under that name.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.
Okay, question, as a photographer, in my contract, I specify I own the images to the host or the individual who hired me. What about if a guest at the event who had their picture taken, does that person have any say as to what is done with the photo? Also, what about photos taken of minors?
So anybody under 18 is a very different conversation. And then it depends. The easiest way would be how your media release is drafted, I think, right? Like, none of these things are cookie cutter. So whatever you want to happen in the situation that you want to create, that's how you would draft the agreement within the confines of kind of statute, what it allows you to do. But so you could cover a lot of these situations.
Awesome. Okay, we're going to wrap it up with one more question, and then any other questions, please email Elena. So one last question here. Can you define a contractor versus an employee for a dance teacher? I have some that contract their services to other institutions as well as mine.
So a dance teacher would be something that would fall under what we're calling a dependent contractor situation, which is another body of law, which we didn't talk about. So it depends. So if you have a dance studio and you have front desk reception, that's an employee, right? 9 times out of 10, the CRA will look at that and say that's an employee. Dance teachers, it depends on the way that you've structured their relationship to your company. And so that would be a conversation that you would need to have with an accountant and your lawyer to see what makes the most sense. And it would be a conversation relating your fiscal capacity and ability to put them on salary or not. And then what the rules would be based on each particular person if they're an employee or contractor. I would say, from my personal experience in dance in high school, the majority of them would fall more under CRA's definition of an employee than they would a contractor, but there are certain situations or relationships where so it depends. I don't have an answer. It depends, depending on the facts for that one.
Awesome. I'm just going to stop recording now.